Alrighty, excellent. So we are going to look at the first unit, which is 3026, and it is work effectively in the investigative services. So what you'll find with these subjects is there is going to be some crossover. Whoever wrote the course for ASQA that we have to produce with the criterias, it was like they wrote the units individually and didn't look at the other unit. Because when you actually work through the units, you go, well, hang on, have we already done that? So please be patient with that. As you work through the units, you will see a bit of crossover. Sometimes it attacks the same subject, but maybe from a different angle as well. So just keep that in mind as we go. What we're going to do is go through each criteria of the unit, work through that, and then we're going to get to the short answer questions, and then I'm not going to give you the answers because I can't really, but I'm certainly going to give you a good idea of what to be looking for in the learner's guide. Now, and then we'll be moving on to the assessments and looking at one of the templates for the practical. And I'll be throwing that up on the screen, a completed one for that first scenario. So it'll give you an idea. Now, for everyone online, I don't know how you set up where you are, but it would be handy if you've got two screens. You can have Zoom open on one, and you could have your Vasto and the subject open on another screen. That would be handy. If you've only got the one screen, if you can toggle and have the unit open to work on, that would be handy. If not, and I don't know for you guys either, if you want to log in into Vasto, into the subject, and nut this out while we're going, or I suggest taking a screenshot of what I'm throwing up, either on your computer, I forget what it is for, screenshot, or just get your mobile phone out and take a screenshot of the computer. Greg, next, yeah, Greg's going to get the Wi-Fi code for you now. We're going to look at, so the first area we're looking at is interpret and apply legal and procedural requirements. So these couple of first subjects, unfortunately to start the course, aren't really exciting, but they're a foundation for what we do. We have to know the legislation and the company policies and that sort of thing that we work with to do this. So we're just going to work through these criterias. So identify and review legal and procedural requirements governing investigative services in the jurisdiction of operation. So we need to know policy versus procedures. So policy is something that a company will have a written document of, these are our policies, whereas procedures are more, these are how we actually do something. So a policy may be, we don't lie to clients. A procedure is when we go out and do surveillance, there's step-by-step procedure of how we actually do that. So you've got each company that you work for, or even subcontract for, will have policies and procedures you need to adhere to. Now, if you're working for yourself as a subcontractor, you will need to have your own. It's up to you how structured that may be, but you need to have your own policy and procedure in place. And that would probably be even more played out when you go for insurance. Your insurer will probably say, well, can we have a look at your code of conduct or your policy and procedures, that sort of thing. So keep that in mind. So they're made up of SOPs, reports, interviews, statements, codes of conduct, and then you've got your various acts. Your various acts, your legislation that you have to adhere to. Always remember to keep professionalism, number one. Remember your time in keeping, especially keeping the client happy. When you promise a date to deliver something, make sure you keep it. And also be careful of anti-discrimination and harassment. Now that can be within your own workplace, working with colleagues. That can also be outside of doing surveillance, taking statements, same deal. Be careful of anti-discrimination and harassment. Any other policies and procedures could be relevant. For those online, just have a think about that, and you might be able to put them in chat of what other policies and procedures you think are important as a private investigator to have. Luke, Tom, any ideas on other policies, procedures that you might have as a private investigator's business?
Policy, I guess a policy that you could have at your own thing is especially interaction with somebody else.
Yep.
I could be investigating somebody or something, and that person flies and comes to Queensland, so I ring Tom and say, I've got a job, this guy's here, he's hiding in Maroochydore.
Yep.
And I can pass that off, and that's my policy, rather than me be tracing all over the country.
Yep.
You're interacting with people to try and set that up to get it done.
That's right. So fantastic to have those contacts as a private investigator. You might quote someone in Queensland, but you use up all your profit getting to Queensland and back. But if you can have your contact in Queensland, then happy days. You can just, okay, you're going to lose a bit of profit engaging someone else, but that's okay. You still can take the job and you can use someone. So some other policies and procedures, you're going to have your WHS, policies and procedures of your workplace hazards, that sort of thing. We've already looked at bullying, we've already looked at harassment, sexual harassment policies. There's a plethora out there. If you've got vehicles, there might be a vehicle and transport policy for the company. So there's all different policies you've got out there. Okay, clarifying regulatory powers provided under legislation. As a private investigator, we are bound by a lot of laws, and you don't have to know all those laws straight up, but there are some you just need to know about, and you learn them as you go. Now, we've got here in your booklet, there's arrest. Because this course is a Cert 3 investigative services, we've got to cover all investigative services. Whereas at the moment, we're just sort of focusing in on private investigation. So arrest isn't going to be one of those things. But you do have some things like pre-trial disclosure. If something goes to trial, you need to, there's disclosure you've got to have. There's your legislation. So does anyone know, you guys know where you can access legislation? Get online. There are some sites. Austil is one. There's the Commonwealth one. What is very important for us as a private investigators is the Privacy Act, because we are collecting personal information and we're handing that on to someone else. And so we've got to think about the Privacy Act and how we are bound and what we can actually, what information we can access, and then if we do access it, what can we give away? So there are the national privacy principles which are embedded in the Privacy Act, which you need to know really well. And they deal with personal information and sensitive information. And they deal with the collection and use of disclosure, governance and accountability, integrity and collection of personal information, and the rights of individuals to access. So if you work for an organisation and you collect information, someone from outside, and this happens a lot with local government, a person, a ratepayer, will want information from the council, and the same happens with companies, private investigation companies, that they can actually apply through the freedom of information to access information. So you always got to keep that in mind. Okay. Identify and confirm acts and omissions that compromise non-compliance or offences under legislation. So non-compliance with rules, procedures or legislation can affect your investigation, okay? Keep in mind, and this is where ethics comes into it for us, of things we can and can't do. So if we have non-compliance of collecting evidence, so we're not, and evidence, we look at the Evidence Act for how we collect evidence. If we don't stick by the rules, our evidence is useless. And we go off to court, we produce evidence, their barrister gets up, which they're paid to do, to try and get that evidence thrown out, and it'll be thrown out because you collected in a way that was against legislation. So, got to keep that, your contamination. Now, this stuff we're talking about, evidence, I will talk about in other units as well, because evidence, the Privacy Act, they're things that keep on coming up for us as private investigators. Evidence is huge. We rely on evidence, and I'm going to keep on banging on about the chain of custody and continuity of evidence. Because when you collect evidence from a certain place, from that time you collect that piece of evidence to the time you may need to produce it in court, you've got to show the chain of evidence with that piece of evidence, and it can't be that chain. The reason they call it a chain is you can't have a missing link. That chain has got to be a full chain, and you can't have a break in it. As soon as you have a break in it, that's where the barrister on the other side will hone in on that piece of that break in your chain, and it'll get thrown out. So keep that in mind. So remember, don't have any loss of your continuity. And also there's interviewing, which we'll look at later. This is also a really interesting point. What is procedural fairness? Because procedural fairness is more so for factual investigation. When you're interviewing someone, you have to show them procedural fairness. That means you have to tell them what they're being interviewed about, give them a chance to tell their story. I'm not saying take their side, but you need to listen to them and what they're saying. And because it's being recorded, especially if that gets shown in court, and it's seen that you're treating that person not well, then it can be seen as you're going against procedural fairness. So everything you do, you need to keep in the back of your mind, am I being fair to the person that I'm investigating, in fairness to them? So just keep that in mind as we go through this. Once again, this is all about knowing your legislation and applying it correctly. So you need to interpret your legislation. Now, we've got their proofs about, I might explain that now, about your proofs of an offence, because this is really important when you're investigating something. So not so much surveillance, proofs doesn't really come into it a huge amount. It's more about factual. If you're conducting an investigation, you need to know if there's an offence. So if it's just cheating someone and there's no real offence, but there's a moral offence, I guess. But well, I'm talking legislation offence. If you're conducting an investigation, an offence is taking place, you need to know the proofs of that offence that you've got to cover in evidence to take it to court. So if you have an assault, let's say, Crimes Act, an assault, it's broken down into different proofs. You have to prove that there was a person that conducted the assault. You have to prove that there was an assault. You have to prove that there was a victim to the assault. As you read through in the Crimes Act what an assault is, you can see, you break it down into, well, I've got to prove that, I've got to prove that, I've got to prove that. And if you can put all those things together and you can prove all those things, you've got an offence that you can take to court and run with. So keep that in mind when you're conducting investigations on a legislation offence. You've got to cover your proofs. It's also, if Greg mentions it later, it's also mentioned as elementisation, or covering the elements of the offence. Same deal. So keep that in mind. It's really important as you go through as a professional investigator, you cover those proofs. If you get to court and you haven't covered those proofs or the elements of the offence, your matter will get thrown out. You've got to be able to seek advice. Suck it up sometimes. We don't know everything, and sometimes you've got to go to someone and go, I really don't know what this is. Can you tell me about it? Talk with others, being able to research and find acts and procedures. So just work your way through different... Evidence Act is a good one because we need to know the Evidence Act. Crimes Act, if you want to look at the Crimes Act. The Privacy Act is another one. Just look at them and work out how, because there's a bit of an art to how to look at an act and research it and understand it. So, does the Privacy Act and the National Privacy Principles affect you as a private investigator? Have a think about that. What do you guys think? Does? Yep. And hopefully everyone online said yes, it does, because the National Privacy Principles, you will find, and there is a short answer question on this which we'll cover later, that it absolutely affects a private investigator. So, we'll cover this now. Some people get confused. In the Learner's Guide, it talks about a small business being $3 million earning or over or under if you're a small business. That really gets thrown out the window because of the piece of legislation that says that anyone that obtains information for a reward, which private investigators do, we go and get information because we're getting paid to do it, automatically we fall under the Privacy Act. So don't get confused by the 3 million. It's a bit of a red herring, that one. It is there and it is true, but it means nothing when it comes to the other section that says, I think it's 6D or something, National Privacy, that 4D, sorry, 4D, about collection stuff about someone else. So just keep that in mind. And that's answered one of the short answer questions. Okay, the next bit, contribute to your positive workplace relationships. So in this unit, we're talking about you're working with others. So if you are going to be subcontracting, working by yourself, you can sort of apply this to broadening your the people you talk to, not because you don't have people in your own company. So broaden this out to the wider contact list that you have and how you're going to talk to people and work with people. So it's good to build positive, as you were saying before, Luke, it's good to build positive relationships with others because it can really help your investigations. So there's the internal and external. There's other businesses and organisations, government departments and general public. So it probably depends also on your personality if you get out there and talk to people. But just having a good relationship with the local police in your area can really help. Even just when you're going to do some surveillance and you're going to sit outside someone's house, just to let the police know that, hey, but they don't know who you are, I'm going to be sitting out here for a couple of days, just to let you know in case someone calls in. They'd like to know that. They put it on their documentation that if someone calls in, yeah, we know what that's about. So it makes it easy for them. They don't have to come out, and it's really embarrassing if you're sitting there and the cops turn up and you sort of get burnt. So you don't want to be doing that. So how might different networks benefit you as an investigator? Well, they're going to help you, as you said, look, before, if you've got a job somewhere else, it's too far for you to go. If you've got a great contact, just ring them, organise it, get them to do it. And it's going to work the other way as well. You'll get other work from someone else if it's not in their area. There's other networks you can actually have. We've got a network in England who they phone us, a law company, and if they want a skip trace done on someone, they phone us and we go and do the skip trace and get a photograph or talk to the person, confirm it's them, get it back to them, and they love us. So that's another contact. So it's going to help your business. If you've got really good contacts, it'll help your business to grow. Thinking here of in the workplace, you need to support those you work with. And once again, that's going to be a personality thing, but you need to be looking after each other in your workplace and what you do. So the different ways to do this is you've got your work health and safety, so you're managing risks. So you're always looking out for yourself and for your workmates of any risks that may... Now that might be a cord on the floor that someone might trip over, or it might be going out to do a surveillance in a certain area. You've been in that area before, you know it's a really bad area. There's this really dodgy house that you don't want to park your car out in front of. You tell your workmates if they're going to go and do that, you just let them know that that's what you're going to do. And they can give you advice, that sort of thing. So it's working together as a team to look out for each other and be safe. Always look out for each other in welfare needs and listening, understanding, and being empathetic. So just going to watch a short video on empathy. This is a brilliant video. I'll flick to that now. Have a look. It goes for a couple of minutes.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you can climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. Yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
people. An old Renee Brown. Yeah, she's really good. So when I'm talking about sympathy and empathy there's two ways to actually use it, because you need it in your workplace. There's times when you've got a work colleague you need to show empathy, not sympathy, with. But it comes in so handy when you're taking a statement from someone. Now, believe me, I've taken a lot of statements from a lot of really hurt people from all different ways. And showing empathy, it's amazing how you can get on side with someone. Not only help them, but it helps you in your investigation of what the information you're trying to get out of this person. So if you can just show empathy to someone, and there is a line as an investigator you've got to draw with empathy, that you're not going to give them a call at midnight and ask them how they're going, that sort of thing. There's a line, a professional line there. But you are showing empathy that while you are with them, you are engaged with them and you're hearing what they're saying. And sometimes it's not about offering advice, it's just listening and being empathetic. So keep that in mind, and by doing that as a professional investigator, it's amazing the information that someone will just spill out to you if they feel they can openly say stuff. So just keep that in mind as a professional investigator. Now, there are sometimes conflicts within a company. And once again, we're looking in this unit, not at investigating it, we're looking at just conflicts that can arise when you are working within a company and conflict. So there's always going to have personalities and personality conflicts between people. It's just the way it is. You just need to manage it. And you have plans to deal with conflict. And it talks about this in the unit of you need to identify the conflict and who's involved. Determine strategies. Now, once again, there will probably, if your company is big enough, there will probably be policy and procedure that you have on handling a conflict. And each company is going to be different on how they do that. So you need to know your policy and procedure of, if there is a conflict, does your policy and procedure say that you confront the person? Or does your policy and procedure say you speak to your manager so they can confront the person? They're all different. So you just need to know what your policy procedure is so you don't go against it. So you take your resolution with policy standards. Always document your actions. Now, you will find this as an investigator when you go out. So this, I'm talking now actually not about what's in this unit, but as a point to become a good investigator. When you go out and take a statement, if you go and do a workplace investigation and you take a statement from someone, you will often find that it's about bullying harassment. Workplace, they always seem to come down to bullying harassment, and it's often because someone's being managed in their work. All of a sudden, someone who's being managed, performance managed, all of a sudden it turns into they put a bullying case against the supervisor. It happens a lot. I've done a lot of them. And the problem is that I find with most companies when that happens is the supervisor has tried to be really nice and talk to the person and get them on side, but they haven't documented stuff. And so they haven't got a leg to stand on. So just remember, within an organisation, keep in mind to document what you do. If you have to have a go at someone and pull them in a line, you can talk to them, but also document it. So then, if it ever hits the fan and it's got to be investigated, you can pull out that email or that piece of that letter that you gave the person and say, on this date, this is what I gave the person. Because saying, I had a conversation on this date with this person means nothing as an investigation goes. It means nothing in court or arbitration. So just keep that in mind. Documentation is something you should be doing within a company, and also you'll find that you need to encourage others when you're investigating workplace investigations, documentation. So you're going to monitor. So we're stepping through here the process of compliance and different things that happen within the company, and now we're going to monitor performance. Could be performance of someone else in the company, could be your performance, and you're going to do that through stats. You're going to do it from speaking with other colleagues, your manager. You can do it from, well, some companies have performance reviews, and that should be probably your manager doing that. You can get feedback from your client. If you get on with your client, you feel that you can ask those questions, sometimes you can sit down and have a coffee with your client and just say, oh, are you happy with how that went? Was there more information I could have given? Are you happy with the timing? Or you can do it by feedback forms as well. Just send them out. When you send out your invoice, you might want to send out a feedback form as well. Just a short questionnaire that they can fill in. Is there anything I could have done better, blah, blah, blah. Stuff like that. And also you've got auditing within in a company. Now each company is going to be different how they do that and how often they do that, but that's also looking at performance reviews. Moral high standards of investigative performance. We're still going on about performance. So we're looking at planning the investigation process and how you're going to do this. Now, everyone's different how they work. I find a timeline is really good. So when I'm planning investigation, I'm speaking to the client. I'll be asking, okay, so what do they actually want? What do they need? What am I investigating? Then when are you going to start this investigation? And when do they want this investigation finished? But also not only the investigation finished, but the report that has to come out afterwards. Because sometimes a report can take you a fair amount of time to put together. So keep that in mind. Don't promise your client when you think, oh, should we finish that investigation? You want me to sit outside someone's house for 3 days if we're doing surveillance? Or if you're doing getting a statement, that'll take me a day to get a statement. So I can knock out that statement. That'll take me a day. I'll give it to me tomorrow, and I'll have it done by the end of the week. People forget actually there's a report that needs to be knocked up. Now some people are really good at reports, some aren't. Everyone's different. So just keep that in mind. You've got to tack that report on. So you might want to give yourself a bit longer. Okay, just keep that in mind. So developing your objective. So that's the first thing, and that's chatting with the client. So you're going to do that by speaking with the client. What is actually they require? Now sometimes your client will go, I might be jumping ahead here, but I'll talk on it anyway. Your client may require something that you go, actually, I get why you need that information, but actually legally I can't do that. So then you've got to work out with your client, how are you, okay, that's the objective. I can't actually do what you want, but let's work out another way to get that information. And you can do that. You can look at different ways. So, and that's you. You're the one with the knowledge. You know the legislation. Your client doesn't know the legislation. They don't know what the boundaries are. So you've got to talk to your client about that and get that across to them. But don't just say, oh, sorry, I can't do that investigation. It's a case of, I can't do it that way, but if we go about it this way, we'll be able to get the same result. So just keep that in mind. You don't want to lose the job. So you develop your tasks. You list all your tasks. What am I going to need to do in this? Who am I going to need to help me do this? What are the resources I'm going to need to do this? So these are things you're thinking in your mind of, do I have the resources? Do I have the personnel? There are some times that you may need to farm something out. So we had a job one time where a mobile phone was used. We had to investigate. Now we didn't have the technology to pull the information off a mobile phone of text messages that had been deleted. But through a contact, we were able to hand that phone over, once again following the continuity of evidence. That person was able to retrieve the deleted text messages write their report, give it back to us, and we were able to move on with the investigation. So sometimes you can't do everything, but you certainly have the contacts they can. So always remember to use that. Identify your risks in your investigation. I don't know if you're like me, I hate risk assessments. I've done millions of them. I hate them, but they've got to be done, especially the way this world's moving, especially if you're working for a government department. You will find that you've got to do risk assessments for everything. Part of the deal. So keep in mind risk assessments, and we'll have a sort of look. I think Greg this afternoon's looking at work health and safety, and in that is risk assessments, identifying risks and how you manage them. Once again, identify correct breach, what proofs. So your client may come to you and say, oh, this person's done this, they've broken the law, and I want them investigated. I want you to do this investigation. Now, you with some knowledge, and maybe you have to do some research, may go, actually, I hear what you're saying, but what they're actually done is not what you're saying, and we're going to have to look at this offence. So I used to get all the time with sexual assaults. Someone say I've been sexually assaulted, and actually they hadn't been sexually assaulted, they've been sexually harassed. There's a big difference. And so when you are looking at that, then you are looking at different proofs. So in your investigation, you're going to collect different evidence for a sexual harassment than you would a sexual assault. So just, I've gone to an extreme there, I know, but just keep that in mind. Just you need to sort of sometimes advise your client of what the actual offence is if they haven't got it right, and then you will need to then go, okay, that's the actual offence I'm looking at, these are the proofs that I need to prove and get the evidence for. Unfortunately, in our workplace, there's going to be negatives that we're going to come across. And that can be personality. We're all different, how we handle stress differently. There's the policy and procedure that sometimes we butt heads against. Sometimes we want to do something and we look at the policy and procedure and go, and we have to work out how to get around it, how to somehow speak to management and go, this is what I'm trying to achieve, policy and procedure says this. Sometimes policy and procedure needs to be changed. Like these days with the way like technology is changing, I'm finding that people's policies and procedures are not keeping up with technology changing. And so that's something that needs to happen. So your policy and procedure document, not so much your code of conduct, needs to be a live document that can always adapt to changing times. So keep that in mind. Environmental situations, just the weather can hamper an investigation in what you're doing. If something's happened, you want to collect evidence and it's raining and your evidence is being washed away, that could be a problem. Or the same if you're trying to conduct some sort of surveillance and it's pouring with rain, it doesn't make it easy. Day-night factors as well. Your access to information. Sometimes it's not so easy to get access to information, especially if you've got to, like if we're looking at medical stuff, if you want medical information on someone, you need their consent to get that medical information. Now, if you can't go to that person and get their consent, you can't go off to their doctor and ask for it. The doctor should know not to give it to you to start with, but you just can't do that. You'd be breaking the law. So you need to know those things with information. Timeframes, things can happen, especially if you're working for yourself and you just don't know what's going to happen in life. And you've promised your client something and then you go and break your leg. You've got to deal with that. You've got to work around it. Maybe you've got to have the contacts and get someone else to do the job. I don't know. Depends what it is. But just keep that in mind. And this is a big one here, lack of training and experience. A lot of people will go, oh, I can do that. And they shouldn't. They need to, if you're not experienced in something, I suggest get someone in to do it. But when you do that, ask if you can tag along. And so not only Are you getting a professional person who knows what they're doing to do it, but you are learning at the same time? So, okay, so you might be losing a little bit of your profit for that job, but it's worth doing. So next time you can say, yep, I've done this, I've got the experience, you know what you're doing. So just keep that in mind. Don't be afraid to go, you know what, it's probably a bit above my pay grade just at the moment. I'll get someone to give me a hand. Don't be scared to do that. Ethical investigator. Now, Greg touched on this before. We need to look at, and this can happen in an organisation, our ethical behaviour in things are going to come up as an investigator that we sometimes need to go, I need to step back from this. I've had it a few times where, especially if it happens in a regional area, if you live in a small town or something, sometimes you are asked to do an investigation on a family member or a friend, and that's where you've got to go, conflict of interest. I can't be doing that. I'll get someone in to do that for you, not a problem. And it's okay to say that to the client. I think your client would very much appreciate that, then it going to court, the barrister for the other side getting up and go, aren't you a cousin-in-law once removed or something of the person you investigated? And if you go, yeah, your matter's thrown out. So keep that in mind. Your client will appreciate it, especially if you explain that to them why you may have to hand it on. Confidentiality. Make sure your client is confident that you are going to be confidential in what you do, and be transparent in what you do as well. So when I say that is I try and let my client know how I'm going to investigate something. So when I'm chatting with a client, I will let them know how I'm going to go about it, but I don't give them the nitty-gritty. I don't tell them the trade secrets of how I'm going to go about something. I'll just say, look, I think a mobile surveillance is going to be best for that job. And by chatting to them about, okay, so mobile surveillance, that's what we're going to do. What times would Johnny be probably leaving the house? So they can probably help you with your investigation going, well, he probably leaves the house at about 7 a.m. each morning, and you go, great, so I don't need to sit there from 5 a.m. I could probably get there at 10 to 7, or a bit before 7. Just that sort of thing. If you chat to the client, it's going to help your investigation. Be transparent in what you're doing, but that doesn't mean, because I get this question a lot, it doesn't mean you give your secrets away of how you're actually going to do that mobile surveillance. You can just give the client a broad idea of what's going on. So we're just going to watch a video now on ethical frameworks. It's a little bit, I say this, I find it a little bit boring, but what is said is gold. So if you can just take away the words of the information that is said, it really is great information. Well,
we've got to recognise an ethical issue in the first place, and that's part of the challenge. If you don't see it as an ethical issue, you don't even go into that decision-making framework. So first challenge, realise you've got an ethical issue that you need to deal with. Get the facts, evaluate alternatives, think critically, make a decision and test it, and then reflect. You know, did you make the right decision? Why didn't you make the right decision? What was wrong? Where did you go wrong? What was the factor that influenced you to take the course that you did? Some of the simple decision-making frameworks and ethical tests. One that I use that I really like, really simple, is the book, bell and candle test. The book test is, what does the legislation say? What does the policy say? What do the rules say? Is there anything in writing that says, you know, you shouldn't do this or you shouldn't do that? The bell test. Are your alarm bells going off? Is your gut wrenching? Are you not sleeping at night? Are you tossing and turning? It's a pretty good sign that you've got an ethical dilemma on your hands. And the candle test. How would you feel if someone held a candle or a light up to what you did, that actually they scrutinised what you had done. So there are three, I think, the visual images are good, the book, bell and candle test, but they work for me, and hopefully there might be a little useful test. Could I tell me mum? That's the one the Commissioner uses. And he tells people, could I tell me mum? Is one of his personal tests. Another handy little one to use. The imaginary video camera. You know, what happens if it was a candid camera type situation and this was going to be reproduced, or it was going to be on the front page of the newspaper tomorrow? How would I feel? The other person's shoes, aren't they lovely shoes? You know, empathy, putting yourself in the other person's shoes, taking a different viewpoint. And cultural considerations, as Rebecca rightly raised, we need to take that into consideration as well. Leadership and ethics, quite a complex issue, and there's lots of great books written on it. Power tends to corrupt. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Lord Acton's dictum. He was actually writing about the Pope and the Catholic Church when he wrote that many years ago. I just think there's an element of truth in that, and I think I can see a few people nodding. Power, the concept of power can be a corrupting influence. So as leaders, we need to be extremely careful.
So I'm going to stop that there, because we mainly got what I wanted you to get from that is those tests for ethical standards of, are you not sleeping at night? What was it? Can I tell you, Mum? Broom, broom. Yeah, could you tell your mum? And holding a light up. Just keep those things in your mind of about your ethics. Now, I've got to keep moving through this because we're running out of time. So, breaches within your industry or within your company, you need to report. And you can report them. Normally, you would be reporting those to management, the supervisor or above. So once again, some components of self-assessment include predetermined questions, criteria for supporting responses to questions. So just keep in mind with your own self-assessment, not only are you doing it to make sure that you're fulfilling what the client wants, but you're doing it, you're growing as your own, as a professional investigator. If you can self-assess and go, actually, where could I do that? How could I do that better next time? And go from feedback from others. So make sure to get feedback from colleagues, managers and supervisors about your performance. Keep that in mind. And then when you do, just go, don't go, oh, cool, okay, I'll try and remember that. Actually work on it. Go, okay, how can I actually achieve better next time? Pretty much the same, we're talking about the same stuff here. Areas you need to improve in. I often find that there are, when I was in detectives, there would be guys that are fantastic at talking to someone who'd been sexually assaulted and empathy and getting a statement, but when it comes to other parts of investigation, absolutely hopeless. So, and that's a natural thing. We're good at some things, not so good, but it's good to recognise those things that we're not so good in and work on them and try and develop those, maybe do a course on it, try and get experience with someone who's done it before. Just develop those skills more that you know you're not strong in, so you're as professional as possible. So I think activities we can be doing is we can be getting a good mentor alongside of us in your company. Now, if you don't work for your company, if you're working for yourself, that's okay. Just get involved in a group, an industry group, and there's plenty out there, even on Facebook. There's an Australian private investigators, there's a worldwide investigators, There's many organisations out there that you can get hold of and become a member of, and it looks really good too when you're advertising for business and you can say you're part of the Australian workers in investigators industry, and also coaching, sort of like mentoring. Okay, so that is the short answer questions for 3026. And now we're going to look at the practical. Now what I've done is we're going to, in each time we touch on a unit, we're going to look at the first scenario, the first practical, the first template in that unit. And so this is straight out of your learning, and it's about a lady that slips over entering Stark Foods, and you've got to investigate it. So we're just going to have a look at the lady tripping over. Let's see that again. And there she goes. Okay, so I know the template I think says a 58-year-old woman. That lady looked a bit younger than 58, but anyway, there we go. She's looking good for her age. So that's the scenario. She's fallen over. Now we have to fill out a template for it. So what I've done is I've got a filled out template. Now I'm going to do this for every unit. The reason I can do this is because each unit has more than one template. So if I give you this example, you still need to do this one, but you can use part of what I've given you, but you've still got a couple more templates to do. So that's why I can actually give you a sample of one. So now I'm not going to we haven't got time for me to keep that up on the screen for you to write that out. But what I suggest is taking a screenshot of on your computer, or just get your phone out and take a photo of your screen. Is everyone cool with that?
Cool.
So what about guys online?
Yeah, so they're saying they can't really read the words, so they may be a bit small online. Maybe just go through it. Yeah, it's coming through sort of small. Blurry and small. And fuzzy.
They're a bit blurry.
Small and fuzzy.
Okay.
So maybe just work through them if they've got them open.
I'll work through them quickly, but also for everyone, just keep in mind that you will be getting these through to you. So yeah, I'll make sure that these copies come through to you as well. They'll probably be emailed out to you or something. So you will get them, but we're just going to work through. You've got your learner name, your agency, who you're working for, your commencement date, completion date, nature of the investigation, so this is a slip and fall. So the scope, a lot of people say, what is the scope? Well, the scope is really just copy and pasting what you've been asked to do. It's not that hard. The scope of the investigation. So this is to determine the facts and any other contributing circumstances around the alleged slip and fall. So what resources I'll be needing? A camera, digital audio recorder, internet, computer. So whatever you think you need for an investigation, those resources, just put them down. What are the other stakeholders? So you just got to think about, when you think stakeholders, well, who else is involved in this? So you've got the manager of Stark Foods, you've got the lady who fell over, you've probably got the doctor who wrote out a medical certificate, you might have ambulance officers. That just think about other people involved in this. And then you've got your what legal industry requirements are relevant for this. So of course, I think you'll probably find for everything you do there will be the Privacy Act, Australian Privacy Principles, because that's like an umbrella over everything we do. But then you're going to have in this one some work health and safety, because maybe there should have been a wet floor sort of sign put out or something. And also there might be some policy and procedure that Stark Foods had that they didn't abide by. So that's page 1. Then we've got page 2. So we've got surveillance. So yes, photos were taken at the scene. Well, that's not really surveillance in this, but let's call it that for now. Surveillance is normally when you actually are going to survey someone, do 5-day surveillance on them. That's what that normally means. Taking statements, absolutely. Yes, a statement was taken from Doris Day. That's the 58-year-old lady that fell over. And just a little bit about that statement, just what she said, yes, it happened, blah, blah, blah. And then also another statement was taken from the manager and a little bit of what he said. That's all I'm after. Just in the statements I want who it was from and just a short little thing of the crux of what they said in their statement. Interviewing witnesses, yes. There's other witnesses to it that you want to... Sorry, I'll get my finger out of the way, Tom. So there's other witnesses. I just want you to put the names of the witnesses, just make them up, of who you collected and what they may have said. Yes, I saw Doris Day fall over, poor lady. Using networks, well, this person didn't use any networks. Use of listening devices, that's going to be pretty rare, a listening device. Using tracking devices, well, if you're in New South Wales, it's going to be rare. If you're in Queensland, you probably could. Video recording of people or relevant activities. That's probably more video recording. If you're going to interview someone, you're going to video record that. Analysis of existing documents. So Doris Day provided a copy of a letter from Prince Alfred Hospital stating the scope of her injuries. That's all I'm after there. And also, the manager provided me with a copy of the accident report from Starford. So that's pretty cool as well. So just that sort of documentation, that's what you're looking for. Seeking advice from legal. So this person has contacted the government department, Bureau of Meteorology, and just went, was it raining? Actually, it was. There we go. Reporting breaches. No, Starfoods have already reported their own incident to the workplace, so that's already covered. You don't have to do that. And then people get caught up. It's poorly worded, and I'm going to change this. Provide details of the planning of an image and implementation of the process. It's poorly worded. When they mean image, they're meaning a picture of your investigation. So what I'm after here is dot points of what you did to start and finish to completion of the investigation. So there could be more in this. This person could have put more. I organised to attend the site, organised to meet and interview Doris Day, I organised an interview with George Spindle, the manager, make inquiries, any other witnesses, check for any other relevant information. That's pretty brief. It could have been fleshed out a little bit more there of some other information about getting the medical certificate from Prince Alfred Hospital, maybe checking with AMBOs. Just make it up, put some stuff in there, flesh it out. And then what were the outcomes? Well, that's up to you just to come up with an outcome. So with all these templates, you're given a scenario and there's certain things you've got to follow, but the actual outcome of the situation, of the scenario, is up to you, okay? I leave that to you to have fun with, but I do suggest to people, don't make it hard on yourself. I have seen some people go off on these tangents, but then all these different legislations come into it and they probably kick themselves for doing it. It does make it hard for themselves. So just keep it simple. I'm happy with simple as long as you cover everything.
With a situation like that, I mean, if she walks in on the footage, it looks to me like she's fallen out of her best form and she's fallen over.
Yep.
Would you, being approached by the insurance company to investigate her, would you put yourself in a position where you would actually try to find out about her? Had she done this 15 times before at 20 different shops and gotten away with it 10 times and got 10 claims, and this is just an ongoing thing where she just moves around and constantly...
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So if you got permission from her, could I see your doctor? Who's your normal doctor? What doctors have you seen in the past? Have you had these injuries before? So that's a situation where you'd really want to delve into that to make sure that she wasn't just fraudulently claiming this on a regular basis. Yeah.
So if I don't know if everyone can hear that, but if Luke's just said, how do you, or as an investigator, do you check that this isn't a way this lady keeps on claiming money and making money by walking in, looks like she slipped over, hasn't really. And it's a good point, and as a good investigator, yes, you will cover that. Now, if she's trying to do that and be fraudulent, she's not going to give you permission to chat to her doctor.
Yep.
So then it may be up to you to go to different stores and ask, has this happened before? You may want to chat to a family member of hers and just say, oh, I'm just investigating this. Has this happened to her before? Like, there's different ways you can go about it. There's probably a fine line in that. But as a good investigator, you'll find the ways to actually find how you can investigate, has this happened before? That you will be stopped because of the Privacy Act. With, like, if you went to a government department, the AMBOs, and said, oh, have you dealt with this lady before? They're probably not going to be able to tell you. So you're going to have to work out other ways to get around that. So that's the challenges of investigation, of going, okay, legislation stops me there, how can I find the information somewhere else? Yep. Okay, so you're just making up whatever scenario you want there. Just keeps on going. And so then what recommendations? Now, it's interesting, be careful. As an investigator, you can make recommendations to management, but there is a line. And you would never suggest someone gets the sack. You would be suggesting that this person needs further training, different things like that. Just be careful with what you do recommend, that you don't put yourself in harm's way of your recommendations. So when it asks for a recommendation, I'm never asking for you to suggest the person gets the sack or other things. It's just what you recommend for the company to move forward in this in an amicable way.
You probably suggested they remove that mat or door, right?
Yeah. There's recommendations. Change your policy and procedure to cover these situations. Further training for your staff, that if there is a wet floor, they put it straight away, they mop it up, and that's just something they do. Just all those things are recommendations. And this can be, it's virtually the same, but there could be some other things about their compliance that needs to change in their ethical behaviour, which could be a little bit different to the recommendations you would make, the practical recommendations compared to the ethical. There's a bit of a difference there. Not always, and you can put the same things sometimes, or sometimes you might see a couple of ethical issues that you may want to add on into that recommendation. So, so that is the end of 3026.